Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamunatiya Vanachari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. You guys can hear me fine, right? Okay, so maybe I can share my screen. Bear with me. Yeah, you guys see my screen? Okay, so we're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 10, Chapter 1, Text 41. So I'll just do the Sanskrit and then jump on to the translation and purport. So the translation is Swapne yatha pashyati deham idrisham manorathena abhinivishta chetanaha drishta shutabhyam manasa anuchintayan prapadyate tam kim apihi apasmrtihi. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So yeah, having experienced a situation by seeing or hearing about it, one contemplates and speculates about that situation, and thus one surrenders to it, not considering his present body. Similarly, by mental adjustments, one dreams at night of living under different circumstances in different bodies and forgets his actual position. Under this same process, one gives up his present body and accepts another. Tata dehantara praptihi. Purport. Transmigration of the soul is very clearly explained in this verse. One sometimes forgets his present body and thinks of his childhood body, a body of the past, and how one was playing, jumping, talking, and so on. When the material body is no longer workable, it becomes dust. For dust thou art, and unto dust shalt thou return. But when the body again mixes with the 5 material elements, earth, water, fire, air, and ether, the mind continues to work. The mind is subtle substance in which the body is created, as we actually experience in our dreams, and also when we are awake in contemplation. One must understand that the process of mental speculation develops a new type of body that does not actually exist. If one can understand the nature of the mind, manorathena, and its thinking, feeling, and willing, one can very easily understand how from the mind develops different types of body, how different types of bodies develop. The Krishna consciousness movement, therefore, offers a process of transcendental activities wherein the mind is fully absorbed in affairs pertaining to Krishna. The presence of the soul is perceived by consciousness, and one must purify his consciousness from material to spiritual, or in other words, to Krishna consciousness. That which is spiritual is eternal, and that which is material is temporary. Without Krishna consciousness, one's consciousness is always absorbed in temporary things. For everyone, therefore, Krishna recommends in Bhagavad Gita 9.34, Manmana bhava mad bhakto madhyajimam namaskuru. One should always be absorbed in thoughts of Krishna. One should become his devotee. One should always engage in his service and worship him as the supreme great. And one should always offer him obeisances. In the material world, one is always a servant of a greater person, And in the spiritual world, our constitutional position is to serve the Supreme, the greatest, Param Brahma. This is the instruction of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Jivera Swarupa Hai, Krishnera Nityadas, Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya, Madhya Lila 20.108. To act in Krishna consciousness is the perfection of life and the highest perfection of yoga. As Lord Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita 6.47, Yoginam api sarvesham madgatenantaratmana shaddavan bhajate yomam same yukta tamo mataha. Of all yogis, he who always abides in me with great faith, worshipping me in transcendental loving service, is most intimately united with me in yoga and is the highest of all. The condition of the mind, which flickers between sankalpa and vikalpa, accepting something and rejecting it, is very important in transferring the soul to another material body at the time of death. Yam yamapi smaran bhavam tyajatyante kalevaram tam tam evaiti kaunteya sada tad bhava bhavitaha. Whatever state of being one remembers when he quits his body, that state he will attain without fail. Bhagavad Gita 8.6. Therefore, one must train the mind in the system of Bhakti-Yoga, as did Maharaj Ambarisha, who kept himself always in Krishna consciousness. Savai manaha Krishna padaravindayo. One must fix the mind at the lotus feet of Krishna 24 hours a day. If the mind is fixed upon Krishna's lotus feet, the activities of other senses will be engaged in Krishna's service. Rishikena Rishikesh Sevanam Bhakti Ruchyate. To serve Rishikesha, the master of the senses, the purified senses, is called bhakti. Those who constantly engage in devotional service are situated in a transcendental state above the modes of material nature. As Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita 14.26, Mam chayuvya vicharena bhakti-yogena sevate sagunan samati tyaitan brahma bhuyaya kalpate. One who engages in full devotional service, who does not fall down in any circumstance, at once transcends the modes of material nature and thus comes to the level of Brahman. One must learn the secret of success from the Vedic literatures, especially when the cream of Vedic knowledge is presented by Bhagavad Gita as it is. Because the mind is ultimately controlled by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, the word apasmritihi is significant. Forgetfulness of one's own identity is called apasmritihi. This apasmritihi can be controlled by the Supreme Lord, for the Lord says, Mata smriti jnanam apohanam cha. From me come remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness. Instead of allowing one to forget one's real position, Krishna can revive one's original identity at the time of one's death, even though the mind may be flickering. Although the mind may work imperfectly at the time of death, Krishna gives a devotee shelter at his lotus feet. Therefore, when a devotee gives up his body, the mind does not take him to another material body. Tyaktva deham punarjanma naiti mameti. Rather, Krishna takes the devotee to that place where he is engaged in his pastimes, mameti. As we have already discussed in previous verses, one's consciousness, therefore, must be absorbed in Krishna, and then one's life will be successful. Otherwise, the mind will carry the soul to another material body. The soul will be placed in the semen of a father and discharged into the womb of a mother. The semen and ovum create a particular type of body according to the form of the father and mother. And when the body is mature, the soul emerges in that body and begins a new life. This is the process of transmigration of the soul from one body to another. Tata dehantara praptihi. Unfortunately, those who are less intelligent think that when the body disappears, everything is finished. The entire world is being misled by such fools and rascals. But as stated in Bhagavad Gita 2.20, Na hanyate hanyamane sharire. The soul does not die when the body is destroyed. Rather, the soul takes on another body. So I'll read the translation again for those who just joined. This is again Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 10, Chapter 1, Text 41. Having experienced a situation, by seeing or hearing about it, one contemplates and speculates about that situation, and thus one surrenders to it, not considering his present body. Similarly, by mental adjustments, one dreams at night of living under different circumstances in different bodies and forgets his actual position. Under this same process, one gives up his present body and accepts another. Tata dehantara praptihi. So thank you again for joining. I seek the blessings of all senior devotees here, including Adipurusha Prabhu and all of the wonderful devotees here. My humble obeisances to you, so that our discussion may mutually inspire us to take the reading of Srimad Bhagavatam more seriously and make it our life and soul. So I'll just do a quick invocation in the interest of time. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmiltam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. So we are in the 10th canto, chapter 1. This is now heralding the appearance of Krishna. Krishna is soon going to appear. And just the story so far, for those who haven't been following the series of Bhagavatam, is Vasudeva and Devaki are just newly married. And Kamsa is leading the procession. He's leading the procession of his wife's marriage, and he hears an unembodied voice, Akashvani, declaring that the 8th son of Vasudeva and Devaki is going to bring about his death. And so Vasudeva decides to sort of chop off Devaki's head just to forestall that situation. And Vasudeva then tries to intervene and de-escalate that situation. So Vasudeva is like the voice of intelligence, and Kamsa is like our anarthas, which is holding our heart hostage. And Devaki is like the devotee who's trying to have Krishna descend in her heart. So Vasudeva is that voice of intelligence who's trying to rescue and salvage the situation. So Vasudeva then gives about different explanations. He's trying to explain from an intellectual and philosophical perspective of why Kamsa shouldn't be engaging in this heinous act. So Vasudeva now is talking about the position of the mind in this verse. He's trying to explain to Kamsa the unique position of the mind, how the mind sort of spawns off different bodies, and we try to enjoy through the agency of the body. And soon enough, the body changes. And this way, the mind constantly keeps generating bodies. So if you see, the journey of a soul begins actually, like as in Prema Vivarta, Jagadananda Pandit describes, Krishna bahir mukha hoya bhoga vancha kare, nikatastha maya tara jhapatiya dhare. That it all starts with this bhoga vancha, or this desire for enjoyment, or even this contemplation for enjoyment, maybe enjoying, and that to enjoying separately. Enjoying is not necessarily a bad thing. We might think, oh, you're not the enjoyer. Actually, we're not independent enjoyer. Our enjoyment comes by serving Krishna. But so in this verse, we learn that Krishna bahirmukha haya bhoga vancha kare. When the soul has a bhoga vancha, the desire for enjoyment, then the soul becomes bahirmukha, Krishna bahirmukha. And bahirmukha literally means that you turn your face away from Krishna. Like imagine you're in a conversation with someone and you just turn your face away. You just don't look at that person. You just turn your face away from that person. Or in a more extreme sense, you turn your back towards Krishna. You have your back towards Krishna. So Krishna bahirmukha means that you have your back towards Krishna for this enjoying tendency. And then what happens? Nikatastha Maya, Maya who's standing really close by, carefully watching, she pounces immediately on such a soul. She's saying, okay, come, well, I have a lot of options for you, like come, don't worry, I have a lot of options for you to enjoy. Would you like a shiny sports car, or would you like some nice jewelry? How about, like different items of material enjoyment? So Maya presents different options for this conditioned soul. And then what happens is how Bhagavad Gita explains, then our cycle starts from Dhyato Vishayan Pumsan. Dhyato Vishayan. Vishayan is like the sense objects that the Maya is presenting. Here, enjoy these sense objects. Then the conditioned soul starts Dhyato Vishayan. It starts contemplating on that objects of the senses. So our whole material existence is perpetrated by this Dhyato Vishayan. When we start contemplating on these objects of senses that the material energy presents to us. And as the Bhagavad Gita verse explains, Dhaitam Vishayan Pumsat Sangati Shupadhyayate. So when we contemplate on the objects of the senses, first we perceive the object, and then we start meditating and contemplating on that object, chewing on what, that object mentally. And then from that chewing or contemplation comes Sangha, or an affinity, or like an attachment or affinity for material objects. And from Sangat Sanjayate Kama, that from Sangha comes Kama, or these desires accordingly develop in the heart of the living entity. So this verse also talks about something similar. This verse in the Sanskrit, if you see, it is saying that Drishra Shrutabhyam Manasanu Chintayan. That by drishtva, by sight or shrutabhyam, like by hearing, when we hear about these sense objects, or when we look at these sense objects, then manasanu chintayan, then through the mind we start contemplating on all these objects. And then our process starts, when we contemplate on the objects, then our desires and so on develop. And what this does is this creates an inner reality. We are accordingly creating an inner reality, or a climate, like an inner climate of our consciousness, depending on what our affinity for matter is, depending on what we subscribe to, whatever matter we are contemplating on Dhyato Vishayan. So accordingly, we create an inner reality. And then what's interesting is Prabhupada says, or at least the verse says, Prapadyate, that once we create this inner reality, Prapadyate tam kimapi apasmriti, then Prapadyate means to surrender. We surrender to this inner reality, or more specifically, actually the word prapadyate or sharanam, we see in Sanskrit, like in Sarva Dharman Mamekam Sharanam Raja, right? Sharanam we see. So this word sharanam is a really complicated word. In one sense, yes, it means surrender, but it's not like surrender, someone's putting a gun pointing and say, okay, I give up, like white flag. So it's not surrender in that sense, but this word sharanagati or even prapadyate, it is you take shelter of what you see. So when it starts with Dhyato Vishayan, and it creates an inner reality, inner climate. And from this, what happens is, just a second, I'm trying to admit some people joining in. So yeah, so it creates some inner reality. And what happens if we take shelter of this inner reality that we're creating, this inner climate, or this inner world that we are living in? We create this, we take shelter of this. And then what happens is, to facilitate this inner reality from manifest, in order for it to manifest into external reality, the mind then starts creating this body. So we can enjoy this inner reality only through the agency of the body when it manifests externally. So according to our consciousness, the mind creates these bodies. Accordingly, it creates spawning of these bodies, different bodies it is generating. So if you're looking at your body, if you're happy or not so happy with your body, think of the content of your consciousness, of your mind. Actually, all of us, we ordered this body. This is a custom-made body that we ordered through our consciousness, through our thought process, Dhyaita Vishayan, and this inner reality. Like it said that the face is the index of the mind, right? So this body is something that we've ordered. It's a custom. We chose this body, or even this reality, this world that we're living in, that the world that you see around you is actually being designed by your consciousness. Not only that, the body, so the mind creates this body. It's like an agency through which we can enjoy this external reality that is manifested before us. So this body is like a container or like a vehicle, like just like we have body is meant to sort of contain something. So we have different kinds of bodies, like this stula sharira or linga sharira. So stula sharira is like the gross body, and linga sharira is like the subtle body. So body is something that encapsulates. So subtle body composing of mind, intelligence, and false ego. It is sort of containing the soul, and the gross body further is a body. It's a container for the subtle body. So this way, the mind creates a certain body, and the thing is, we need a certain suitable body to function in to move around in a particular medium. So depending on what the external medium is, we need a certain like a body which has to match that dimension. And Prabhupada talks about this a lot. Life comes from life and other books, that the living entities are sarvagata. They're all pervading. They survive in different climates and different species of life. And and he explains that if you need to survive in a sun planet, you need a body a suitable body, that a body that's body made of fire, composed of elements of fire that can survive in that climate. And even in our earthly realm, you see as per different climatic conditions, bodies are accordingly created. Like even in Antarctic and Arctic circles, if you see under the ice caps, the ice caps, basically you see even in the freezing water, there's actually life form. There are certain fishes which actually are suitable to that condition. Like even here in Central Park, I live really close to Central Park, and I observe these ducks that are in the lakes, and even half of the lake is sometimes frozen in winter, and still you see ducks. And it's fascinating that the blood of the ducks, they don't freeze, and even in this freezing cold water. So the mind creates a certain body depending on our external reality of the same dimension of that reality. Accordingly, we create a body. So like if you, for example, you have to live underwater, like imagine you have to create a civilization. Now they're trying to put humans on Mars, then you need equipments to survive in that condition, or you have to sort of create an underwater civilization. Then you need submarines and so on, like a clunky outfit, and you're sort of what is it called? Not scuba diving, but you're sort of going deep under the ocean, and So, by the way, I forgot to mention, feel free to unmute yourself. This is not meant to be a monologue. So this is like our hope is we come together to sort of discuss and churn the nectar of Bhagavatam. So any points you have, feel free to jump in. I'd like to learn from you and hear from you. So yeah, we sort of have these clunky outfits, and we're sort of going underwater. So our body is also actually a really clunky outfit. It's like a really awkward, clunky outfit that we are trying to navigate this world and enjoy this world through this agency of the body. And what's further fascinating is that the body and the mind have a really cyclic relationship with each other. So the mind creates the body, and the body also creates the mind. So if you see, during life, through all of our experiences, dhyayatu vishayan, we are perceiving and contemplating, and accordingly we develop affinity and desires. We're creating a certain inner climate by our affinity to matter. So during life, our bodies are creating or shaping up our consciousness, our mind. And what happens at death? At death, then the mind creates another body. So during life, the body is creating the mind, and at death, the mind creates the body. So like this, the mind and the body have a cyclic relationship with each other. So in the purport also, Prabhupada mentions that when the body disintegrates and dies and merges with the material elements, the mind is still working, the mind is still functioning. So and this functioning mind is what gives rise to another body. So through our actions, we are actually also simultaneously designing our future bodies. So the mind and the body have a really cyclic relationship with each other. So that's the power of the mind. And in the verse, Prabhupada's the verse is Manorathena. So this word Manorathena is really fascinating. In Sanskrit, it literally means the chariot of the mind. Manorathena, like we say Ratha Yatra, right? Ratha is like a chariot or the vehicle. So Manorathena. So our mind is like a chariot. When one is situated, this mind can just carry us miles, and we just travel through this agency of the mind. And that is what Vasudeva is trying to explain to Kamsa, how by the chariot of the mind, Manorathena, the mind just carries us and accordingly creates certain bodies which fulfill our certain propensities and desires. So this Manorathena, this mind just takes us to different places. So like we were discussing, this mind creates this reality around us. You know, this mind has this ability, whatever's in our mind, accordingly it manifests outside. And even the universe has this mystical ability. The universe mystically shapes up depending on our consciousness. The whole idea of this material creation is, it's mentioned in one of the purports of Bhagavatam, is not only to fulfill our material desires, but also to liberate us. It has twofold function. So this whole material energy, this universe has this unique mystical ability. It takes a certain shape depending on our own consciousness. Whatever your consciousness, this universe shapes us and gives us what we need. We have come here to enjoy, right? Krishna bahirmukha bhoga vancha kare. So Krishna gives us that if you want to enjoy this material world. So the universe shapes up as per our consciousness. And that's why living entities take up different forms. Brahmanda, Brahmite, Kon, Bhagyavan, and Jiva. The living conditioned soul is going from one species to another, one planet to another, one experiences to another. And the universe gives us that. The universe shapes us and we find ourselves in different situations depending on our consciousness. And even in one situation itself, different people can perceive a same situation in different ways. I think like we were discussing the last time you were here. Two people in the same situation are viewing it a completely different way. That is because of the content of your consciousness. However you have your consciousness, that's how you see the external world. So this way we see that the universe is shaped as per the content of our consciousness. So Drishtva Shrutabhyam Manusanu Chintayan, as this verse says, by Drishtva, by seeing and hearing, our consciousness is shaped. So it starts with perception. We perceive, you're perceiving, and then by perception, what happens is perception shapes our desire, like we discussed from Bhagavad Gita, right? Dhyato Vishayan Pumsat Sangati Shupadayate. Like how does perception shape desire? Like from perception comes meditation, from meditation comes this affinity or attachment, and from attachment our desire shape up. So from perception, it develops a certain desire. And then what happens is, depending on this desire, our desires manifest into actions. If our desire has a strong enough pull, then it transforms into action. And that when that action is repeated over a period of time, then that action develops into habits. Habits are more condensed, solidified actions, like samskaras, you know. So this habit, in fact, it's said that there's a saying that a habit is like a shirt made of iron. Once you wear it, it's kind of hard to take it off. So when our actions condense, solidify, they turn into habits. And then when habits are allowed to continue for a prolonged period, then these habits transform into our character. It's these habits that make our character. And through our character is how we shape our destiny. And that is what Vasudeva is trying to explain, that through perception, one acts and then it shapes our desire, and then mind creates certain bodies. And then from desire comes actions, from actions come our habit, and from habits we shape our character, and then accordingly our destiny is also shaped. It so innocently starts by just perceiving. The conditioned little jiva thinks, let me see what's out there. You know, Bhagavan Chakara, just innocently the living entity saying, like, maybe there's something else besides our experience with Krishna. So this way, by this perception, you know, Drishva Shrutabhyam Manusanu Chintayat, or in the language of Bhagavad Gita, Dhyato Vishayan Pumsa. It's this innocent perception. Yes. Do we have a comment? I see a hand raised. Will, Prabhu.
Hello, brother. Hare Krishna, Hare Bo.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Bo.
Hare Krishna.
So, I was thinking the mind is very, very, if we allow the mind can take us to places where we don't want to be. And I noticed that my mind I fight with it every single day, like every second. So I get, like right now I'm having thoughts of saying something else when I know I should be staying on topic. So yesterday we were having a discussion about brainwashing. And I thought to myself, listening to the Bhagavatam class every morning is like going to the car wash and having the brain washed, in a good way. Okay, so what brainwash? So they say brainwash. So what, we're brainwashed? So you know what? Our brain is washed clean from all the dirty stuff, that the mind thinks of. That's just my opinion. I don't mind if someone says I'm brainwashed, because I don't mind being brainwashed clean from disgusting, immoral, thoughts that I shouldn't be thinking.
Yeah, thank you for that reflection. Beautiful. We have to sort of cleanse Chetodarpana Marjana, right? This is a process of cleansing our mind, or brainwashing. So the fact that you're talking about brainwashing, that means that we have a brain. You have to have a brain first to wash it. That's a good sign. We're in the right direction. So
okay.
So yeah, that's a good sign. Thank you. And yes, Adi Purusha Prabhu, you have a comment.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
This is kind of an interesting...
You're coming in with an echo, Adi. You're coming in with an echo.
Just a minute. She's adjusting.
Sounds like the Matrix.
You can hear me?
We can hear lots of you, actually. More than one. There's a lot of echo.
Yeah, okay, she's adjusting the sound vibration. We're observing this conversation between Vasudeva and Kamsa. He's about to kill his sister with a sword, with her hair in his other hand. And Vasudeva gets into this whole philosophical thing. You're not the body, and there's the consciousness, and it's being shaped in your new body. It's incredible that he would just like start such a deeply philosophical conversation in a situation like that. And we have conversations like that where we have an intention of somehow or other giving people an opportunity to serve Krishna. But here in the conversation, he realizes Kamsa doesn't care. He's not listening to all this philosophy. And so Vasudeva has a presence of mind to understand, okay, basically we just want to stop him from killing her. So that would be the way that he could serve Krishna. And so he says, all right, we'll give you the children, you can kill them, but just do it later, not now. So we have these conversations with people. I mean, you can start a conversation on the street. All glories to the Sri Krishna Sankirtan, who cleanses the heart of all the dust accumulated for you. And then you can just see it's just, you're spinning your wheels and they're not here. They don't hear anything. You can get that. And then we have to go to plan B. All right, we're feeding the homeless and we're asking if we give a donation. Oh, okay. At some point, we have to evaluate whether or not this person is hearing all this philosophy or not. And then we have to maintain the intention of the conversation to somehow or other connect this person to Krishna's devotional service. They may take a book, they may not, but they may give a donation. But we only have it's only a few minutes, if that. So just seeing what's happening in this conversation gives us consideration for how we might apply this in similar situations, that we have to sometimes there has to be a plan B and adjust so that we actually help that person. And interesting enough, we were speaking yesterday about how he's interested in saving his sister, but he's also considering how to benefit Kamsa. That's all.
Yeah, it's a beautiful. Thank you for that reflection. So yeah, it's a nice point that sometimes people are not ready to hear the full philosophy, and you have to come up with a plan B, either prasadam or just have them chant. They might not be receptive to the so-called brainwashing. So we have to sort of think of a plan B. But yeah, so we're talking about the mind and how it's a fascinating entity. And these desires are like, and I'll probably wrap up in 10 minutes and we can have further discussions. So the mind stores these desires like seeds, and they're in Nectar Devotion, Rupa Goswami compares these tendencies to seeds, like just like you sow a seed and it fructifies in time. So like that, we plant through our experiences, we plant these seeds in our consciousness and they fructify at different times. And it's fascinating that our mind can store just unlimited amount of seeds, these desire seeds from lifetimes and lifetimes. And it's all there. And they don't fructify until the time is right. And even in our practice of Krishna consciousness, suddenly some strange inclination comes up and it leaves you wondering, where did that come from? So all these desire seeds are stored in our mind. And what happens is when the mind, when we cannot enjoy everything through the agency of our current body, and this verse explains, and the mind then spawns off another reality through the agency of dreams. So whatever we cannot experience through this physical gross body in our so-called reality, the mind spawns off another alternate dimension, another reality, this mysterious dimension of dreams. And through the agency of dreams, then one then further fulfills all these inclinations. But that's not it. Again, like we were discussing, in order for us to experience or fulfill these desires, we need a body. So even in dreams, Prabhupada explains, even in this verse and other purports, he explains that in a dream body, you might hear this word dream body, you might think, really, what does that mean, dream body? So it's actually a really beautiful philosophy, if you look into it. The mind actually even in dreams, the mind is creating a body. Like for example, you're dreaming that I'm sea surfing, or I'm driving a car, or I'm engaging in a sexual activity, or things like that. All of that actually, you're perceiving through a body. You're looking at yourself doing that activity, even in the dreams. You're looking at yourself doing that activity, whether you're sea surfing. And you can't do that activity if you're not have some conception of a body. So even in dreams, you're actually the mind is creating a body, even in dreams. So that's why it's fascinating that the mind and the body have a really cyclic relationship. And the mind is constantly creating these bodies. And Vasudeva is trying to explain that through our mind and our body, we create short-term actions, but long-term reactions. I'll say that again. Through our mind and body, we create short-term actions, but then long-term reactions. And he's trying to warn Vasudeva, he's trying to warn Kamsa that you're acting on these impulses. These action might be short-term, but think of the consequence. He explains it's unworthy for you to kill a woman and things like that. So it's interesting that we create long-term reactions just by our body and mind. So we act through our material consciousness, and it is in Bhagavatam, elsewhere, like in the 6th canto, it's explained that there are 3 states of material consciousness. We function through 3 sort of tiers or 3 states of material consciousness. The first one is Jagridvi, or wakeful state. Second is Swapna, or like a state of sleep. And the third is Sushupti, which is a deep sleep. So Jagridvi, Swapna, and Sushupti. These are the 3 states of consciousness. So, and you might wonder, what is the difference between sleep and deep sleep? Any thoughts? What is the difference? Yeah, and Angelica? Is that
Oh no, I'm not responding to that. I want to say something else. So yeah. Just wait till you finish that.
Sure. I just want to ask if anybody sort of, like thoughts of what do you feel is the difference between Swapna and Sushupti, sleep and deep sleep? They sound the same.
Hare Krishna, Godruma, Prana, Prabhu. Is the difference between sleep and deep sleep is that deep sleep is when you're having like REM, we're actually having dreams, and then the other one you're not? Or is
it's
it
the other way around? But yes, that's exactly what I was looking for. Yes. In sleep state, we're having dreams, and in deep sleep, you're knocked out cold, to put it in simple terms. So you're basically not fully conscious, or in scientific terms, it's like the REM sleep and the non-REM sleep. It's said that in REM sleep, you're sort of perceiving and anyway. So Jagridvi, Swapna, and Sushupti. Angelica, so did you want to jump in with a comment? Or
yes, I don't know if you have enough time, but I was just inspired to share what I read from Bhakti-Tirtha Maharaj, because he was describing 4 types of dreams we are having, and that was very inspiring for me. And so the 4 types of dreams are the ones based on the psychological stimuli. So, we may be walking outside somewhere and then having a dream based on what we saw or what we experienced through our senses. There's also the dormant, which is dreams that reveal what lays in our subconscious mind and we don't really have access to, but in the dreams, which you also mentioned in your class, like suddenly we can have this desire or this thought process, and it's like, where did it come from? And then there's the predominant thoughts, which is really a beautiful way of even assessing what we are thinking throughout the day, because sometimes we can have dreams that are simply based on what thoughts we are having when we are awake. And then the 4th one, it's also incredibly beautiful and inspiring for me, because the last one that he describes is the dreams that help us to work our karma. And so we may be having dreams or even like very difficult experiences while we are sleeping, and these can be even ways of acting on our karma. And so this way we are not bound to the effects of time that we are having when we are awake, and even we can have like years of our life worked karmically through dreaming, because we are not bound to that time effect when we have when we are awake. But all it is to say is simply that even dreams, which is something that oftentimes we feel like we have no control over, Krishna is still allowing us to reap messages and reap lessons when we are sleeping. So I just want to share that. Thank you so much for inspiring memory.
Thank you.
Wonderful is Krishna.
So, but I just want to take a few more minutes to talk about the most important part of this discussion. So I feel that personally is the most heart of it, is beyond these 3 states of consciousness is the 4th dimension. And that dimension is called as the Turya, the Transcendental Dimension. And through this Transcendental Dimension, one can perceive spiritual reality. So like these 3 states, like we discussed, Jagritbi is a state, it's said that this comes from the material mode of goodness, and sleep comes from the combination of passion and ignorance, because even in sleep, one is active. So passion and ignorance, and deep sleep is like ignorance. But this Turya is transcendent, Vasuddha, Vishuddha Sattva. So this Turya is a transcendental state of consciousness where one starts perceiving spiritual reality. And it is explained that this happens only when our mind is transformed. Just like in our material consciousness, the mind creates a suitable body depending on our inner reality, right? Whatever our inner reality is, our mind creates a suitable mind, body, like body and senses to perceive that inner reality. So when our inner reality is transcendental, the mind actually creates a spiritual body and senses for us to perceive spiritual reality. Like it said, Atha Shri Krishna Namati na bhavit grahyam indriyat. That through material senses, one cannot perceive the spiritual dimension. So when our inner reality is transformed into spiritual quality, then the mind actually creates a spiritual body and senses through which we can actually perceive this transcendental senses. And there are many scriptures that explain what that state of Turya looks like. Like in books like Madhurya Kadambini, it's described the state of Turya, or this transcendental state of trance, is all 5 senses awaken simultaneously. Like even in our material consciousness, if you see, our 5 senses cannot act fully at the same time. Like let's say, for example, you're seeing something and you're absorbed. It's hard for you to also sort of listen to something else. Or for example, you're tasting something and the 5 senses cannot fully, the mind cannot fully sort of comprehend all of those 5 senses simultaneously. But it's explained in Madhurya Kadambini, at the state of Turya or trance, all senses simultaneously awaken, and they're perceiving Krishna through all 5 senses. And it is said that this state of Turya is so powerful that the devotee faints and wakes up again, and again faints and again wakes up. And it's just too much of a sensory overload, because one is perceiving Krishna through all 5 senses. And it's a really transcendental state of consciousness, this Turya, this fourth dimension, where this mind produces the spiritual senses and spiritual body. And through this spiritual agency, one can perceive Krishna. And it is said that this state of Turya or transcendence can only be done through one way, only through one way and one way only. Any guesses of what that is? Like only one way. There's no doubts of, I like to end all of my talks in this one point. So you might probably be guessing what that is. What is that? Only one way that can be, you can transcend in this age of Kali, you know, Kalu naseva gatiranyata. Yes, absolutely. In this age of Kali, there's only one way we can enter that state of Turya or that state of transcendence, where one can perceive spiritual reality. Like I saw someone forwarded a meme that someone is Googling, can I get to Goloka without chanting? And Google is chasing that person with a stick, you know, trying to chase that person away. So like this idea of, you know, can I reach the state of Turya by other forms than chanting? So this state of transcendence can only be attained. And in the language of Bhagavad Gita, it's known as trance or samadhi. I'll quickly, I promise, this will be real quick. Let me share my screen. This is one of my favorite verses in the Bhagavad Gita. It explains what this state of Turya looks like. What is the state of trance or samadhi? So Krishna is explaining, in this stage of perfection called trance or samadhi, one's mind is completely restrained from material, mental activities by practice of yoga. But that's not it. This perfection is characterized by one's ability to see the self by the pure mind and to relish and rejoice in the self. That is a proof that you're in the stage of transcendence. One's ability to see the self by pure mind and to relish and rejoice in that self. In that joyous state, one is situated in boundless transcendental happiness, realized through transcendental senses. Established thus, one never departs from the truth, and upon gaining this, he thinks there is no greater gain. Being situated in such a position, one is never shaken, even in the midst of greatest difficulty. This indeed is actual freedom from all miseries arising from material contact. So this state of Turya, in the state of Turya, one can actually perceive not only Krishna, but one can actually see oneself. That is because the mind is actually like a mirror. The quality of the mind is it reflects whatever you put in front. If you're contemplating on material objects, the mind reflects that back. So that's why our reality, external reality, is just material, because that is what we are trying to perceive. So the mind reflects back whatever you put in front of it. But if you put something spiritual, the mind is cleansed, then the closest thing to the mind is the soul. So in this pure state of consciousness, one can actually see the soul and Krishna through the agency of the mind. So this perfection of samadhi means sama is like equal and dhi is situated. So samadhi is one is like situated, really equipoised. And the state of samadhi, there's twofold state of samadhi. One is sampragyata samadhi and asampragyata samadhi. Sampragyata samadhi is that samadhi which is materially induced, either through any material hallucinations or drugs. You experience a state of Brahman. Actually, that's what people experience through drugs, this temporary state of like bliss, you know, but that is materially induced. Asampragyata samadhi is that which is done through the agency of spiritual medium. So anyway, sorry if I'm rushing fast. I had a lot of thoughts to share, but we have very little time. I'm begging Ananda Bihari Prabhu that maybe extend our discussion from 7 to 8 so that it's not a rushed discussion. In ISV, devotees go on discussing Bhagavatam for 2-3 hours, just churning and churning nectar. So I'm sorry if I'm rushing fast. I have a lot of ideas to share and a lot of things to hear from you, but we have a short time and we have to sort of condense everything in a short time. But any last minute comments or questions?
Hare Krishna, Godruma Prabhu. Thank you very much. Beautiful class. And thank you for telling us how to build our spiritual body. That's so fascinating. I'm on it. So does anybody else want to share, reflect, anything?
If no one has anything
pertinent? I just have a quick question, Godruma Prabhu. So you were saying that your mind will create a spiritual body. How is that possible? The mind is a lump of matter. How can it create spiritual body?
So this mind, which is like a subtle body, is compared to be like a glove. So glove is shaped by the shape of our hands, right? So the material mind is actually made in the shape of our spiritual mind. So the soul inherently also has a spiritual mind and senses. So our material senses and mind is like a glove that takes the shape of our palm. So in our conditioned state, our hand is like covered with gloves. And that is a material mind which is encasing our spiritual consciousness. So by the process of chanting, what happens is when our consciousness is sufficiently cleansed, the material mind dissolves and our spiritual mind fully awakens. So the mind is needed though. Even in spiritual dimension, the mind is needed. It's not that in a spiritual platform one operates without the mind. One needs the mind, but the difference is in the spiritual reality, the mind is fully purified. And through the agency of the mind, and that's why if you see Nectar of Devotion, Rupa Goswami talks about this rasa tattva. And what is rasa? If you see, rasa is that emotion, that nectar that comes in relationships. And how do you experience this emotion? Because emotion is a state of mind, right? So it's not that emotions can come independently of the mind. So in our material consciousness, material state, we have material mind, and material mind projects material emotions. Even if it is spiritual situations, it is still through the agency of material mind. But what happens when the mind is fully purified, then the spiritual mind then gives rise to spiritual emotions. So that is why I was sharing with one of my friends that Rupa Goswami talks about how bhakti and mukti are like, bhakti is the desire for enjoyment, and mukti is spiritual, is the desire for liberation. So our goal is not to completely become callous from any spiritual emotions. So Rupa Goswami warns that actually one becomes has too much of a tendency for jnani, then one cannot even perceive spiritual emotions. One's heart becomes really hard. So he says the desire for mukti is worse than bhakti. So we might think that desire for sense gratification is worse than desire for liberation. But Rupa Goswami says it's the opposite. One becomes too hard-hearted by liberation or jnana, with this tendency of renunciation or too much of mental knowledge, and then one becomes so hard-hearted that even spiritual emotions don't descend in our mind. So anyway, to answer or to reflect back on your comment, Prabhu, is we need spiritual mind. We need emotions. We need emotions in our heart. If not, we cannot feel emotions toward Krishna. And in a conditioned state, this emotion is facilitated by human devotee relationships. So that is why it said that don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Try to have good relationships with devotees. And through these devotees, one can learn to develop these spiritual emotions too with Krishna. Sorry if I went on a tangent.
Jai, wonderful. So you said bhakti and mukti. What's the difference? Mukti is the material liberation and bhakti is spiritual?
Bhakti is material enjoyment. And mukti is desire for liberation, material, like a mundane, like a liberation. So Rupa Goswami compares that to ghost and a witch. He says bhakti is a ghost and mukti is a witch. Or like a wizard, to be more politically correct, like a ghost and a wizard. So he says that the witch or a wizard, so a witch or a wizard is more dangerous than desire for. Anyway, the point that we're trying to make is we need the agency of the mind, but in our conditioned state, when the material mind is creating material bodies, but when the mind is purified, the spiritual mind will then fully reveal and manifest. And it's not that the spiritual mind is creating something that does not exist. So it is said that the soul is like a seed where all of the qualities are embedded already there, just like a seed of a banyan tree. Everything is there in that seed, the leaves, the branches, everything is in the seed. And when in time, when it fructifies, the branches, leaves, everything come. So like that, our spiritual state is dormant in the soul. And in time, everything fructifies and everything comes. Our spiritual senses, the mind, everything shapes up and we realize who we are spiritually, constitutionally, without getting too esoteric. So any other comments, or should I read out comments? We'll wrap up in maybe 2 minutes. But any other comments? Or
Andrea shares a beautiful point in the chat.
Yeah.
She says that this reminded her of a quote from a verse she read recently. To see the Supreme Lord, one must have the spiritual eyes of devotional service. Adi Lila 1-2-25. Beautiful reflection.
Beautiful. And I see, I don't know if this is another reflection. Andrea says it's about speaking to the people about the essence without, I think she's reflecting back on Adi Purusha's point. Bhima Prabhu says, all glories to Prashadam, first connection. We have feedback from Will. Radhika says, reflects back, short-term actions with long-term reactions is a great point to reflect. And Julia is sharing her appreciation. We have Radhika. Andrea again is reflecting.
I know you. I know you.
And yeah, any other thoughts or reflections, questions, comments, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think we're going to switch to 7 o'clock. There is an agreement on that. We just have to implement. This way we have more time for interaction.
Exactly. This way we don't have to, because I felt bad today. We couldn't have long discussions. So yeah, hopefully we can have.
Akiko-chan has given us thumbs up on that. Great.
Yeah. We have an approval from Akiko.
Yeah. Andrea. Nice. Okay. So thank you very much, Godruma Prabhu. Beautiful, relatable, practical discussion. And thanks everyone for your reflections, comments, hearts, thumbs up. Thank you very much. Tune in again tomorrow is another day, and have a wonderful Ekadasi. Nothing in, nothing out. Devotional service, no bhakti today. Okay, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Granth Raj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.
Godruma Prabhu ki jai.